Encounter with Krampus. It was a quiet December evening, and the streets outside were dark and still. I had just settled in when I heard the faintest clink of chains outside my window. I froze, dismissing it as wind until I heard heavy, scraping footsteps. Trembling, I glanced outside and saw him, a hulking, horned figure with red eyes blazing in the cold night. Krampus. He scanned the street, dragging chains and a sack bulging with something. I ducked, trying to convince myself it was a hallucination. But then I heard scratching at the door. My heart stopped as his voice seeped through the wood. "Naughty child," he hissed, voice dark and gravelly. I backed away, hearing the door handle rattle, his heavy breath fogging up the window. Just when I thought he'd break in, he gave a low, guttural chuckle and disappeared into the night. The next morning, I found claw marks on my door. I know now Krampus is real, and he remembers who's been bad. Encounter with the Yule Cat. That year, I hadn't earned new clothes. I'd ignored my winter chores, figuring nothing would come of it until Christmas Eve, when I saw a massive shadow crossing the snowy fields outside. I peered out, squinting, and my heart nearly stopped. There it was, the Yule Cat, an enormous beast with fur dark as midnight and eyes glowing like embers. It prowled closer, circling the house with terrifying grace, eyes gleaming as it peered through each window, searching. I shrank back, hoping it hadn't seen me. Then came a heavy thud at the front door, and I stifled a gasp as a low, rumbling growl filled the air. My pulse pounded as I imagined those enormous jaws snapping shut around me. I stood there, breath held, silently pleading for it to leave. But a second thud struck the door. Harder this time, the beast's growl more insistent. I could feel it on the other side, waiting. I don't know why it finally left, but when dawn came, I saw its paw prints, each one as wide as a plate, circled around the house. Now, I make sure to earn my winter clothes and complete my work. The Yule Cat, I've learned, doesn't forgive idleness. Encounter with Frau Perchta. The night before Epiphany, I sat alone in my room, trying to ignore the stories of Frau Perchta, the terrible belly slasher who punishes the lazy. I hadn't kept my promises or finished my chores, but I brushed it off, convinced it was all folklore. Then, a scratching sound came from the window, metal scraping against glass. My heart raced and I told myself it was just the wind, but the sound grew louder, shifting into a slow, deliberate tapping. A chilling whisper drifted through the air. "Lazy, disobedient child," I froze, every story of Perchta flooding back. Slowly I turned, and there she stood, a pale, skeletal figure with hollow eyes, her knife gleaming in the moonlight. My voice shook as I stammered promises to do better. She stared, her knife hovering near my stomach, and for a moment I felt its icy touch. Then she faded, leaving the room deathly cold until dawn. Now, I keep every promise. Frau Perchta, I learned, does not forgive. Encounter with the Mari Elwyd. One late winter night, a strange knock echoed from the door. I opened it cautiously, and there stood a figure draped in white, a horse's skull for a head, the Mari Elwyd. My blood ran cold. I'd heard the stories. The spirit demands a battle of wits or brings ruin. Its hollow eyes bore into mine as it began to speak in rhyme, its voice cold and echoing. My throat went dry, but I managed a shaky reply. The Mari Elwyd laughed, a hollow, rattling sound as its bony jaw clattered. I tried to rhyme again but stumbled. Its sneer deepened as it stepped over the threshold, shadows stretching across the room. The air grew colder, an icy weight pressing down on me, trapping me in place. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it turned and vanished, leaving a chill and unease that lingered for days. Now, each winter, I practice my wits and prepare for its return, because next time, I might not be so lucky. Encounter with the Wendigo. It was the dead of winter, and we were snowed in. My friend had gone hunting but hadn't returned. As I sat by the dying fire, I heard footsteps crunching in the snow outside. I opened the door, relieved, but froze when I saw it. A tall, gaunt figure stood there, skin stretched tight over bones, eyes hollow and hungry. The Wendigo. Its breath clouded the air, a stench of decay and rot. It stared at me with an empty, piercing gaze, licking its cracked lips. I tried to slam the door, but its clawed fingers shot out, curling around the frame. Hungry, it rasped, voice like frozen gravel. My heart pounded as I stumbled back, but the creature stopped, listening to something distant. Then it turned and faded into the night. In the silence that followed, I realized what had happened to my friend. I left soon after, but the memory of that hollow hunger haunts me. I know it's still out there, watching, waiting,